I don't know. I'm a weird polymath in the sense that I nerd out just as much on business and finance and economics as I do chemistry. So I saw that and I just kind of laughed. All right. So we are back again today with Matt. And if you guys have been subscribing to the channel, I'm sure you probably saw the last episode. We had Matt on. Matt, for people that might not have seen that last episode, though, can you just give me a real quick rundown of who you are, what you do?
Well, my name is Matt Jones. I'm currently a supervisor over at Uniq Pressure. I've been in the industry for a few years now and cultivating, processing, and compliance.
Awesome. And so you hit me up after we released the last episode and was like, honestly, it's good, but I think we can do better. And one of the things that you had sent over was this kind of like write up for cold traps and hydrocarbon extraction. And you were, if I understand right, just kind of like looking for general thoughts and whatnot. But I figured, because we didn't really get a chance to kind of go over it, why not dive into this write up here live on the podcast?
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I initially wrote the write up for Pel Polar's version 4 of his Everything Solventless book that recently came out, and more than happy to dive into that with you.
Awesome. So, do you want to kind of just give us a little bit of background on like what this book's all about before we kind of get into this solventless guide, and we can go
Yeah,
from there? Maybe just kind of like give us a little background on everything.
by all means. So, my buddy Brian over at Pel Polar has been working on this book for quite a while because this is his fourth iteration of it. And really, the mission is just getting the information in people's hands so they can get a better understanding of the products they're consuming, how they're made, and maybe even get to start doing it themselves as well.
Awesome. So I'm curious, like, how is this like a textbook? Is it a short book? How deep does it kind of go into it?
I'd say it's kind of a halfway in between. Fairly, I want to say a short book might take you a day or two to read if you're a little lax about it. But overall, it's meant to be informative. It's not really meant to be a straight and narrow SOP for anything because, accidents can happen and there are liabilities out there. But it's more or less meant to at least get somebody started and try and understand what it's all about.
Nice, I dig it. I always feel like we don't have enough educational like references or materials, content, whatever you want to call it, in the cannabis industry, and especially on extraction. It was something that I kind of toyed around with ideas for writing different books since I've got two on Amazon. Granted, they're not cannabis related. It was a crypto and stock market investing guide that I wrote up for some friends. And then after I realized that I was like well over 200 pages into this thing, I was like, ah, fuck it. Let's Amazon Kindle self-publish it, see if anything sells. And it didn't. But um, yeah, it's like you can never have enough educational material out there. So I really like seeing people like you guys working to put this out. Any idea on how long until it's going to be dropped or where we can get some copies when it'll be out?
Currently, it actually just released on the
Shit.
14th of last Sunday, and you can currently find it on Pel Polar's website.
Okay.
It's,
I'll throw a link in the description too. Any idea on how much it costs, or is this a free resource?
I know the physical copy version is about $93 after tax and all,
Okay.
but I believe there will be a digital version coming out.
Nice. So with this one, then, this cold trap, is that like just a chapter or a segment? Or is this
I'll
like, am I able to share this? Is this, I don't want to be giving out like secret sauce from the book that might be copyrighted.
No, by all means. Yeah, this was just a short segment in the book, two little write ups that I did. One
Okay.
being on cold traps, because I had recently collaborated with Brian on getting a cold trap for his decarb system. that
Mm-hmm.
was having issues where they were getting their pressure release valves and inner control mechanisms kind of gunked up with everything that was burning off.
Gotcha.
And yeah, try and help control that, get everything condensed in the cold trap so hopefully it doesn't just bleed out everywhere else. And then
Yeah.
also, have the great potential of being able to save some terpenes or so forth over a course of time and being able to reintroduce them.
Oh yeah, that's super important. One of the things that interested me was like right off the bat, I see up here right up for Polaire solventless guide and then cold traps. And cold traps is something that I had never really associated with solventless. It was something that I had always just seen as almost like a protection mechanism for your pumps. And it was a way to protect the pump from your volatile terpenes or potential solvents and stuff like that. So it got me wondering, like right off the bat, am I like missing something? Do we actually have a use for cold traps and in solventless, or is this guide kind of a little bit more all encompassing?
So I will say, I do believe that there is a use for cold traps and solventless for sure.
Ah,
Although the guide for this iteration, for this version, is more leaning towards being all encompassing or
I like that.
involving a little bit of everything. And I'll say when it comes to cold traps and solventless, I especially see a big opportunity for them going between the freeze dryer and the freeze dryer vacuum pump. Because I
Okay.
know that everybody likes to save, well, not everybody, but a lot of well endowed processors have tried saving the water and ice that they get out of their freeze dryers and melting it down, letting the terpenes rise to the top, freezing that, and then trying to pour off the terpenes after freezing it a couple of times.
Now, are you really getting that many terp? So, like, for context or frame of reference, I have not spent a lot of time in a solventless lab, and my experience with solventless has all been really small scale. So, I've really not even had much exposure to freeze dryers. Um, what temperatures are we really talking about when we're freeze drying? Because I'm curious, you hear the word freeze in the name. Wouldn't that then imply that the temperatures are cold enough to keep the terpenes from off gassing or becoming volatile?
Yeah, and you would normally think and consider that, but you also got to consider for the water to properly evaporate out of the hash to where you're not leaving any ice in your material, getting those dark spots on your banger. Um, you want to be able to heat it up to a temperature where the water can reach sublimation. And if the water is
Hmm.
reaching sublimation and getting
Your
cooled
terps
off,
are.
your
That
terps
makes
are as
sense.
well.
That
And
makes sense.
a lot of the times, like with the ice in your material and whatnot, it collects on the walls on the inside of the freeze dryer. But you know how much ends up going through your vacuum pump? Because I'll say every time I step into a freeze dryer room, I can smell the terps in there.
Okay. That's interesting. Um, do you want to dive into this? What I did was I probably should have like highlighted and put notes, but I didn't have my iPad near me, and so a lot of these, I'll be honest, because I read this like a week or two ago. I don't really remember what I highlighted it for, so we're gonna kind of relearn this together, and I'm sure a lot of it was just me being fucking hypercritical on like wording or phrasing, but we'll see. There might be some like scientific concepts and stuff that we can dive into. Or I remember a couple of them I highlighted because I thought, oh, this would be a good idea to go over on a podcast. So um, honestly, up here, cold traps in the typical setting put in line between a vessel that goes under vacuum and the vacuum pump to catch debris or harmful vapors. Yeah, I don't know why I highlighted that. So as air continues to pass over the now liquid volatiles and then travels through the vacuum line to the vacuum pump. That might have just been kind of how I struggled to pronunciate it. Maybe just like rewording that. But again, this is all just being hypercritical on how authors are.
By
Um,
all means, I'm here for it, and you never know. It could possibly lead to us publishing something in the future
yeah.
together.
So this one I did remember it. The priority of the cold trap is to recondense and save volatile compounds that will evaporate from your oil as the THC converts to, or THCA converts to THC. So is that just basically saying in the decarb process, you're going to have these volatile compounds coming out? I think really the priority, instead of like recondensing and saving those, is really just protecting that really expensive vac pump. Uh, and the reason I say that is, have you ever taken those terps out of a cold trap and put it into a vape cart to use as actual flavoring?
Me personally, I have not, because
It's shit.
yeah, I haven't had the satisfaction of being able to work in good enough conditions
So
where that's possible. I've seen terpenes that usually get pulled off of wiped film and short path distillation units.
exactly what I was going to bring up there.
Yeah,
If you ever been around a short path or a wipe film, that first fraction is god awful, and it's all just oxidized terps. Um,
that is true. And one of the reasons I always find those oxidized terps like very well present is because of the decarboxylation step beforehand.
mhm.
And I know that there are usually cold traps on those decarb systems, but a lot of people don't try to put in the extra effort to separate their terpenes from the solvent afterwards because there's a lot of residuals that end up coming out as well.
The other thing I wanted to bring up too, and I'll share it, I'll pull it up here. I'm looking for this study where it showed that terpenes can actually form, here it is, benzene and methylcrolane, which are toxicant carcinogens. And that was at elevated temperatures. I wanted to pull up this study just to get a reference for what temperatures those were at. But I know like we're not super elevated temperatures when we're talking about freeze dryers, but we are when we talk about decarb. And sure, we can utilize a vacuum oven to lower those boiling points, which is effectively why we do that. But you can still have fragmentation and molecular basically breakdown that forms these uh, carcinogens. And that's what this study right here basically looked at, was toxicant formation. And they found that basically the molecule right here, like limonene, myrcene, linalool, common terpenes, they're made up of this isoprene unit here. We can see it on the top, myrcene. We can see it kind of rotated and then built into this ring. Um, and that breaks down into all these different degradation products. Let's see, which one? Number one is methylcrolene, which is a carcinogen to be wary of. And then obviously, benzene is not a fun compound to be exposed to. So, not saying that this is for sure happening, because we're not necessarily at the super high temperatures of dabbing, which is what these authors looked at. But under vacuum, you could potentially depress all those factors and maybe form some. So for me, when I look at what do we do with these potentially volatilized or oxidized terpenes, that might just be something that's better off used as like a solvent for cleaning, or just trash it, because terpenes are cheap. Like I look at Abstrax, for example, is a terpene company that I love and I always promote them. Uh, I'm working on doing a video for them right now, or not necessarily for them, that utilizes their terpenes, and it's like $20 a bottle is what I was looking up because I was pulling some screenshots of the products, and it's like you can get really fucking good terpenes pretty cheap. I'm all for waste valorization. Don't get me wrong. Let's try to maximize every dollar we can and really recycle, reuse every little bit of this plant. But I think there's also a nice line that we have to like, okay, diminishing returns have gotten us so far. Now we might be actually integrating something bad. Um, And so,
And I will say, at that point, especially with the cold trap, because I'll see a lot of people decarbing their rosin in just little mason jars, maybe cracking the seal a little bit.
yep,
And, I think you bring up a really good point talking about the degradation into benzene and whatnot, because a lot of the times, if you don't have anywhere for those volatiles to go, you're just going to sit on top of your rosin, or better yet, still be in the material. So, in in effect, having the cold trap at least sends those volatiles somewhere to stay.
yep.
And
Uh,
they can be pretty useful for that in that case. I actually didn't even consider that when I was writing this, so thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and for reference, before I close out of this study, they were using temperatures of 710 degrees Fahrenheit for the e-nail, which is 378 Celsius, and they used a range between 340 and 482 Celsius. Um, so for all of us that use freedom units, go ahead and do the conversion on your own. But we use metric in the lab. Getting back to this though. Um, let's see why I highlighted this. As air continues, oh, we already went there. So, along with this, the use of nitrogen blanket in the headspace will greatly assist in reducing the degradation of these compounds as they enter the headspace and cold trap by reducing their ability to oxidize. That is true. However, if it's cold traps connected to the vacuum pump, wouldn't you just be breaking that vacuum seal by continually having to feed nitrogen into the system to maintain that blanket because the vacuum's just going to pull it out?
In a sense. So, here specifically, I was talking more or less about the decarb reactor, because I'll say when I wrote this up, I didn't want people
Mm,
to think that cold traps were just meant for one thing and one thing alone.
gotcha.
So, in the sense of this cold trap, there is a somewhat of a constant source of nitrogen feeding it on, but then you're also relying on the pressure release valve to do its job as
Okay.
well and only spurt out at about 5 or 10 psi.
Gotcha. All right. So you must start with good biomass to end with good concentrated form of that biomass. This is, I'm going to push back. I love the fire in, fire out mentality. Don't get me wrong. But I also have a little bit of an ego as a chemist where it's like, give me the shittiest trim and I can give you fucking fire extracts. And a lot of that is just good extraction procedures, equipment, good cleanup steps, whether it's winterization to remove the fats and waxes, and then just crashing out into a crystal because then we can just get pure THCA crystal, like is right here, and then reintegrate your terpene formula back in, and then you're getting all the good as a live resin sauce or live rosin sauce, but without any of the lipids. So that one, it was almost like a little joking highlight, but yes, in an ideal world, you would want really good starting material, and it will give you really good extracts. Whether you're a good extractor or not, whether you have good procedures or equipment or not, like fire in equals fire out. That's a good baseline motto to live by. But chemistry's fun, and we can do some cool shit with chemistry.
It
So,
definitely is. I have definitely had my fair share of making a lot of isolate and distillated SKUs for some companies now. I guess in this section, I really more or less was referencing towards making just a crude extract out of the plant, because ever since I started doing solventless, I found that everyone wants to just maintain um, just a smaller, concentrated, more potent form of
mhm.
the biomass that it came from. And I keep thinking to myself, man, if I had some really beautiful, well treated, fresh frozen material in the BHO lab like I did in the washroom, I'd probably be able to make some crazy, crazy concentrates. But sadly, people don't like making a habit of doing that.
Well, it's hard because in this market, if you have fire grade A flower, that's going to the dispensary as flower usually, or it's going to go to rosin because rosin still has that little bit of value add still. Um, and again, for good reasons. But yeah, it's like kind of sad to see how the hydrocarbon markets evolved and how the past 6 years, it's just been kind of treated as a means to either make distillate or just a quick and easy way to make some low, cheap extracts, which is another interesting thing, too. Something I was noting to myself, this is completely random. Have you noticed that the price of extracts, and as a consumer, I love this. Um, I was like questioning how these labs are staying in business making money when like I'm at the as a consumer paying like $4 a gram at the counter, which means they're probably wholesaling it to that dispensary for $2 a gram. And it's like that same brand's flour will sell for $10 a gram, and it's the same metric batch. So it's like I understand that you're just running your trim and shit like that, but it's an interesting like business economics use, like case analysis actually would be the right word to run on it, because it takes multiple grams to make 1 gram of extract. But why are these extracts selling at a fraction of the price of the input material it took to make it?
I think at the end of the day, that really does say a lot about the cultivators that are around and whatnot, because there's a lot of cheap material, and there's also a lot of times that growers just have bad rounds and they can't really do anything else other than extract it. And that's
Mm-hmm.
where, we often get our pride and joys from, because it's ultimately a good
Yeah.
batch, but just has one little imperfection that won't
Yeah.
let
I
it sit
mean,
on the shelf for very long, or
this was four
causes it
bucks a
to
gram.
sit there for too long. But that's
Yeah,
actually pretty
and I
sweet.
look at like back in the day, this was a $30 or $40 gram. It doesn't smell that great, so that's going to be the video I'm going to make. Is how do we take this and make it a dabbable extract and make it actually enjoyable? And then I'm going to do a challenge to myself and do the same thing with taking a bunch of reclaim from my Puffco and seeing if I can make it like taste good enough where in a blind taste test you wouldn't know it's reclaim. I feel like that's the ultimate extraction like test. Can you make this reclaim taste good?
I'll
But
say I've had some great experiences using Abstrax products in the past.
they're phenomenal.
I think that they're a great company, especially with their cannabis derived terpenes, and they're ones that I believe also may have minor cannabinoids or
Hmm.
nuanced effects to them.
Well, so my thing with Abstracts is, and I actually have right here, they put out a handful of years ago now these two white papers that really kind of changed the industry. And what it did, without spending an hour diving into this because I could, they basically asked what really creates the smell of individual unique cannabis strains. And they found it wasn't terpenes. I mean, obviously, terpenes play a big role in it, but they found these compounds that are in very small quantities, like parts per billion, parts per trillion, and they're tropical sulfur compounds, volatile sulfur compounds. Um, what was it? Prenylated indoles and mercaptans. But it's basically all these other things that are in very small quantities that cause the actual like sour diesel to have sour diesel. And they employed like a group of sensory scientists to try and like match different smells to different strains. And what they were able to actually correlate, for example, like Scatol created a different or created a characteristic smell of, I want to say that was the sour diesel one, but I'm going to dive into it more for this, like I said, video I'm making. Anyways, when they put out that white paper and now it's peer reviewed research, for me as a lab manager and also as a chemist, that to me signals that one, they're doing the groundwork to actually figure out what makes these strains unique. They're going to be the most likely ones, in my mind, to recreate that flavor profile because they're finding these other unique compounds and they're finding the ratios that they exist in the plant. So that goes a long way in building confidence and trust with Abstrax. And I've met a handful of their like scientists and their crews, so I might be a little biased, and they're friends of mine, so take that with a grain of salt. But I mean, honestly, they are the only terpene company doing research like this, to my knowledge. I don't see True Terpenes doing stuff like this, or any other terpene company for that matter.
I'll say I do have great faith in them also, knowing that they're getting into flavorants like for edibles, and they've always been a hops company as well.
Yep.
No, so
Well,
knowing that they've always had good research into that and how well hops and cannabinoids end up correlating, I got
yeah,
to
they
agree with
got.
you.
Have you seen their new AI line of terps?
I have not, no.
All right, we got to pull that up real quick. We'll divert away from this, and this will be a little fucking unpaid shout out to them. I mean, and they're good people though, so like
But yeah,
I'm
I've never
happy
had a
to.
bad conversation with them ever. And to be honest, actually, a lot of the residual solvent reports that I've seen off of terpenes Abstrax fares a lot better than most.
Yep. So I actually have their AI line in my fridge right now. I could run and get it, but I believe it was their mood boosting AI terp effects. So I could dive into the whole white paper on it. They basically did kind of the same thing where they got a whole group of people and built out a science experiment around them, and yeah, so they got these right here. Like the relaxed one is one that I enjoy a lot. And this is where I say this shit's cheap. So for 4 ounces, 100 grams, $420. I mean, that's minuscule when you think about how many carts you can make with 100 grams of terpenes,
Yeah, the fact a
right?
fraction of a milliliter goes into it, it's not that
Yeah,
big of a bite.
you only need like 3 to 7%, depending on how crazy you want to go with it. Because there's a point where terpenes actually don't become beneficial anymore. And that's going to reference back to that study I pulled up earlier, where if you're running 10% terpene blends in a cart or a Puffco, and you're hitting those temperatures, especially in a cart, you can be getting some potentially harmful compounds. And it's harsh. Like I've tried 10% blends of terpenes thinking more is better, and it's not. There's a point where it's uncomfortable to hit, but these, they taste really good. The effects actually are what they say they are, and there might be some placebo effect in there, but here's what they did. They had data from 5,000 products and 200,000 patients, and they put together this algorithm, used more than 1 million data points, analyzed it with AI. I like that trust but verify. That's a little crypto uh, investing thing. But so, yeah, I mean, they did a good job, and they have the white papers here for anyone that's watching. You can go to their website. They have this science tab here. You can download their white papers, learn about their lab and stuff. But that's just a quick little shout out to the guys at Abstrax. All right. So diving back into this, you'll find that all these methods of filtration are especially useful when trying to make isolated products. However, they are contradictory when making full spectrum products. That one I was a little confused on what you meant by that. Do you want to kind of like dive into that real quick?
Yeah, by all means. So a lot of the times, and really talking in terms of remediation, because we'll most definitely both agree on the fact that filtration is needed no matter what. You don't want debris or any, live plant material in your concentrate. But when it comes to different forms of remediation, a lot of the times you're stripping the flavonoids, terpenes, and minor cannabinoids from your concentrates by sending them through a chromatography column or so on and so forth. I've even
Hmm.
seen some concentrates lose a good amount of taste off them from over filtering them down past like 1 micron.
Okay.
It's a little interesting. I think some of that had to do with fats, but I've also heard of some people losing some of their terpenes by going a little too cold in their defatting stages as well. So if you're trying to make like a really good crude full spectrum um, concentrate that reflects the biomass that it came from, it can be contradictory.
Okay. I wonder why those terpenes are. Is it just getting like entrapped in the lipid matrix and just the nature of the fats kind of just trapping it, and that's how you're losing it in the filtration process?
I've seen some reports of people saying that going to temperatures like negative 80°C, it's just too low, not really worth it, as opposed to just going down to negative 30. They get a little bit higher
Yeah.
in their yields, so they don't have any crystallization happening on the inside of their columns or anything.
Okay.
And just more is able to flow its way through the columns with still leaving behind vast majority of your.
Gotcha. This one I want to dive into here. So you mentioned chromatography, and here you have flash chromatography. Do you want to kind of like what is flash? Because we hear color remediation chromatography. You and I talked about that yesterday, which is really just column chromatography at the end of the day. Um, then you hear flash chromatography. We've got things like thin layer chromatography, which, if anyone's taken an organic chemistry class, that's those little silica plates and molecules will travel up it at different rates. We got medium pressure liquid chromatography, high pressure liquid chromatography. That's what we use in testing labs. Gas chromatography. Uh, what's your thoughts on it? Like, do you want to dive into it? Maybe define it for our viewers.
So for chromatography as a whole, I can't necessarily say I can speak very well on the definition of it, but for flash chromatography in specific, so far it's been the more finalized version of the words that have been floating around the industry for about the last 10 years. I remember even talking with you, and you said this, and it was actually an experience of mine as well when I first started that learning CRC stands for color remediation column, and then having to learn that it actually stands for chromatography column. But where Flash starts to play a portion in that is, your regular chromatography column is usually done with little silica plates, like you were mentioning. And in this case, with a hydrocarbon extractor, we're trying to aim for very high throughputs. And to do that, we have to get through our chromatography columns as fast as we can. And realistically, we're just kind of sending it through there for a very short amount of time on the way to our collection vessel. And with that, a lot of the times we're hitting it with some nitrogen for back pressure, anywhere typically around like 30 to 50 psi. I don't like going over that because I've seen a
Well, you
lot
can
of
blow out your
people,
column.
yeah,
Yeah,
you blow out your column, or I've even seen people start to express leaks in their system by going a little too hard too quick.
and so that's basically flash is you're just making the process quicker, right? Whether that be with the added pressure from the nitrogen, potentially from your solvent like the butane that's already in the system. It's just flash chromatography is really just another name for CRC at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, at the end of the
Okay.
day, and it's also kind of a matter of the flow that you got going, because like you mentioned before, there's different types of pressures. You can go for like a medium flow chromatography, or very fast high throughput flash chromatography.
Yeah, and I think really equipment is going to be the big differentiator there, right? So like a tried and true HPLC is something you would see in a compliance lab, whereas flash chromatography is going to be through like a 2-inch diameter column that's 24, 36 inches long. That's much different than, oh, fuck, I'm moving right now. So that's why I've got this big black drape behind me, but behind that there's a million boxes. And in there, normally on my bookshelf, I have little HPLC columns, and they're like teeny. They're a couple millimeters in diameter, and they're maybe like the size of my finger, if that. Like, it's crazy the difference in size, and it makes sense though. These compliance labs, they don't need to push all the throughput that we are in a processing or manufacturing environment. Um,
Yeah.
cool. That was one that I was excited to like. I highlighted just so that we could dive into it for like learning education's sake. But I'm glad that you put that in there because not many people have heard of flash chromatography. And to be honest, had I not taken my cannabis chemistry degree and been exposed to organic chemistry classes, I would not have known.
Genuinely same. I'd still probably be sitting here thinking CRC meant color remediation column
Yeah.
myself.
Well, and that's what it does. It removes. So I guess we should really kind of like get into the basics of chromatography because we didn't really dive into that. How does it remove color? Um, do you want to dive into it? I could dive into it.
I'd
Um,
love to dive into it a little bit if you'd be more willing to expand on it.
yeah, yeah. Let's hear your kind of thoughts on how CRC or chromatography in general removes color, and then I'll kind of follow back.
Okay, sweet. So the process and how our medias for the CRC process interacts with the solvent is not through like a dissolved process. What happens is the solvent goes through the pores of the media that we have stacked in the column. And for example, color pigments, pesticides, heavy metals, so on and so forth, can actually get caught in those pores, stick to the media as it passes through, instead of the media, for example, being dissolved in the solution of solvents and it intermingling and there being some kind of chemical overlay between the two. And, that's kind of where I see a lot of people get the misconception from and why people are scared of CRC because they think it can bleed into their end product. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you know what pore size you're working with when it comes to your media, it should not be bleeding through. But that
Right.
also comes with keeping your checks in safe as well, and making sure you're not mixing anything up and have everything stacked properly.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, like everything in this world, once you know about it or you know how things work, it's not as scary anymore, right? Like once you know how to play with fire correctly, you now have a tool for a stove or warmth in a furnace instead of burning out in your house, or like a firearm. It could be a tool or it could be a hazard really quickly. Um, I think when it comes to the fear of products made by CRC, it's the same thing. To me, chromatography at its basic is just separation of compounds. And chromatography goes about that in many different ways, depending on the different types of chromatography you employ. And even within, like, we'll use HPLC, for example. If I want to do a compliance test, there's many different ways that I could go about separating all the individual compounds in a mixture and analyzing how much individual analyte is there. Um, and that's just depends on what type of column I use. Um, the other thing you can do is like, this is getting into more advanced, like you can even figure out how much like of the R and S enantiomer you have of each molecule. So for example, a lot of compounds have this thing called chirality. And to simplify that, it's basically like if you picture a molecular structure in 3D form, there's right and left-handed versions of it. And even though my hands are basically mirror image of it, they aren't able to be superimposed. So you can actually separate out those two compounds. And chromatography at its base form, when it applies to cannabis, it's separation based on how quickly these compounds elute from the column. And what that means is that each compound is going to have a different molecular weight. So, or sorry, I should say each molecule has a different molecular weight. THC is going to weigh different than a terpene. It's much heavier. A lipid, which is a really long chain, is going to travel through this basically giant filter of sand at a different rate than terpenes will. And so all these molecules race through this column at different speeds because of their molecular weight, their shape, their interactions with the media, which is also known as the stationary phase, or their interactions with the solvent, which is known as the mobile phase. And as the mobile phase travels through the column, it's going to start to filter out and separate. And that's why you have different column lengths to choose from, because you might need a super long column to resolve out molecules that are really close in molecular weight or size. And you might need different pressures and all these different things. But at the end of the day, chromatography is just a tool for separating out compounds. And if the compounds we want to separate out or leave behind are just pigments, I don't see anything wrong with CRC.
Yo, I got to agree with you there. Because ultimately, a lot of people have negative things to say about it, but I've seen it used in very mild ways to where people can't even tell.
Yep. And that kind of like piggybacks on what you say here is with that, it's vital to know your media pore size. What I imagine you're talking about there is the actual media in your column. If you have basically think of it like rocks for an over exaggerated example here compared to sand,
Well, they work as
you're
a sediment filter in water, so
yeah, exactly. So it's like your pore size is going to help control that flow through the column. Obviously, you don't want it too restrictive where nothing's going to flow, then nothing's going to resolve, or it's all going to get trapped at the bottom and elute out at the same time. But you also don't want massive pores where like it's just flowing freely through and you're not having any separation. But yeah, I mean, really, like, let's see. Always make sure your collection vessel is 2 times the volume of your material column so you have enough vacuum space to collect the entire solution and never create a hazard overfilling your system. With this, I just say, well, nowadays you really can't modify the system, so it's not a big deal. The engineers that design these have to worry about it. But yes, if you are building your own system, really take time to look into the actual chemical engineering behind it. And as someone that used to build hydrocarbon rigs for caregivers, I am guilty of not looking into that. I was just like, okay, 2 to 3x, that makes sense. I can do a couple runs before I have to dump it. But no, there's actual reasons behind that. And it has to do with like gas expansion and safety risk and fail safes and shit like that. But I was glad to see that that you put that in there.
well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's definitely something I've overlooked in the past, and then I'm just kind of sitting there with a half-empty column and a full vessel trying to quickly build another one.
Yep. Now this is one I wanted to push back on here. So you had remember we want to extract our cannabis cold because that helps us maximize the solubility of cannabinoids in the solution and minimize the solubility of lipids. That's actually backwards. So think about what we do when we crash out crystals from a butane solution. We go super cold because cold's going to reduce the solubility in solution, and that's how we get the precipitation of THCA. And the reason that we go super, super cold again is to really minimize the amount of lipids that you pull, because like hot solvent is going to pull a ton of lipids. So you had it correct on the minimize the solubility of lipids, because we don't want our waxes and fats to dissolve into the solvent. But if you really wanted to maximize the solubility of the cannabinoids, you would want to run it hot.
That is definitely true there, without a doubt. Really do. I really did get mixed up on my wording. The fact that is definitely the best middle ground, I'd say, in the
Mm-hmm.
fact of being able to pull off the most cannabinoids while leaving behind the most lipids at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a really big important factor, and I've seen studies, like I've said, debating on the correct temps and whatnot. You definitely don't want to go too cold, and you surely don't want to go too warm and end up with a
Right.
really dark brownish looking crude
But
oil.
I mean, say you have time available and you have a fairly relatively cheap labor cost. Is there anything bad to extracting hot, because you're not going to have to pay for the electricity or energy of cooling the system? Or I've worked for a lab that used a fucking crazy amount of CO2 to chill a system, and it was like just blowing it into the C1D1 booth. It was crazy. But anyways, like the cost of chilling that system, you might be more advantageous. It'd be interesting to run the math on it to extract hot, where you know that you're getting maximal recovery of cannabinoids. And yes, it will come with pigment and lipids. But if you then just go and send it through like a winterization step, say you've got a lenticular filter set up where you can just run a fucking shit ton of winterized crude through and then go directly into like a falling film recovery, or even if you had to rotovap it out, just a couple big rotovaps, um,
Yeah, you could
like,
produce some
or even just a
amazing.
CRC column.
Yeah, you send it
It
through a skid filter.
exactly. I'm almost curious if it's better now to just run hot. And I guess it really depends on what you're looking for, right?
I was
At the
just
end of
about
the
to say,
day, that end product is going to be what determines that process that comes before it. But I don't know. For me, it's like I would almost run hot, clean it up with either a CRC column or just do a crystal crash out and recover your THCA crystals. From there, you can melt those crystals into distillate. You can turn it into extracts, as just mixing the terpenes back in. Granted, it's a little bit of a weird experience. I don't know if you ever just tried pure THCA and terpenes. Um,
yeah,
it's
it's pretty
it's
fun.
different. It's different, I will say.
They go better
But
together, I'll say that.
oh yeah, for sure. But you can do so much with it, and you can make it into edibles.
Yeah, you could
That
definitely make some beautiful Rick Simpson oil with the process you were just describing
mhm.
as well.
Yeah, that might be an interesting spreadsheet to set up and look at. Like, is it actually more cost effective nowadays, or at what level of throughput does it make more sense to run hot, capture that extra yield, and then just clean it up, versus the cost of energy to chill it and the time to get it down. Um,
Because I could
yeah.
see that, especially if you're working like with a bunch of really fresh frozen material,
Hmm.
and your room is already cooled as well. And you just need to get through as many batches as you can in one day, just
Yep.
shooting through a bunch of solvent into that material and then letting it winterize overnight into the next day in the freezer.
So you have here a helpful piece of equipment used for cooling your solvent is an inline condensing coil, usually jacketed with a recirculating chiller or cooled with dry ice surrounding it, put right between your solvent tank and material column. This is one I didn't know if it was a typo or not, because I've never personally seen anything between the solvent tank and the material column. Where I've seen condensing coils put is between the um, collection column going back into the solvent tank. Usually there'll be like a molecular sieve there to pull out moisture, And then what you're doing is basically helping that active or passive recovery, whatever you're doing, convert those solvent vapors back into a liquid before it enters the solvent tank. But I'm curious, have you actually run a condensing coil between the solvent tank and material column? And if so, what would be the benefits of it? Because I'd imagine your solvent would already be pre-chilled to whatever you want, and that's only a couple foot distance between your solvent tank and material tank.
Yeah, so this was actually something I put in there because in the past I've had experiences with, not being able to get my solvent chilled at home because I can't
Okay,
afford a chiller. So, in place of what I do for that is I use the condensing coil to be able to pre-chill
I
my
could see that.
solvent so it doesn't get injected into the material column warm, which ends up warming up the material a little bit, and then I have to
Mm-hmm.
add more dry ice, wait for it to cool down even longer during the soak time.
Yeah.
And I have seen it before where even when I'm shooting through my nitrogen starts to warm up my column as I'm putting it in, and then my extract starts coming out a little bit darker towards the end.
Yeah. This is one being a grammar nerd. Liquidity is like a financial business term. The chemistry version of that would be won't reach liquid state until negative 195. But if that nitrogen's liquid, man, buy that fucking nitrogen stock.
So, I appreciate you pointing that
I got a good chuckle out of that one.
Oh, that gave me a good
As
one
someone
too.
that, like, I don't know, I'm a weird polymath in the sense that I nerd out just as much on business and finance and economics as I do chemistry and all that stuff. So I saw that and I just kind of laughed, but I figured the average person would totally get what you're saying there.
Yeah, I'm surprised my grammar checker didn't even get that. That doesn't make sense much
That one's
contextually.
funny. Uh, all right. I don't highlighted that. Maybe it was just like your columns are empty of solvent, then technically your solvent would have already been reclaimed. Fucking, I have no clue. Yeah, I mean, this is all pretty much. I don't really realize why I highlighted it, but it looks good. This one I would say once your concentrate no longer bubbles or react within the vacuum, that's definitely not a great way to go about it. I'd say just one in doubt, do 3 or 4 days. But yeah, if it's like actively bubbling still and you're dabbing it, that's sketchy.
Very, very sketchy. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
always try to go for at least 2 to 3 days based on the COAs that I've seen. I mean, I've heard of some people being able to get a faster purge, not using an oven and using a centrifuge purge technology that's been adapted in recent few years or so. I think we talked about that a bit yesterday
Mm-hmm.
with the spin purge.
Yeah, those centrifuges, they can really cut down the time. And they're getting cheaper too. They were kind of cost prohibitive there for a minute. Um, but the amount of time saving that you get, if you think about having a batch being able to go from extract to compliance ready in like 3 to 4 hours compared to 2 to 3 days, that's a huge ROI right there. And then beyond that, if you're trying to go straight to the diamond step already, or you're trying to separate out your terpene fraction from your crystals, it's already done for you right there. So you can always reintegrate them and like mix them back together if you want that like sauce and live resin type product. But you're basically getting two birds stoned at once, like with that process. Um,
And I do want to
but
point out, even though I did add it in there, um, to note like the visual context of your material as it's purging. Don't let that be your say all
yeah,
be all. Always send it to third party testings
yep,
because there have been times where, I've had concentrates given to me with absolute confidence saying that this is clean, this is good,
yep,
but it's below the state's allowed limit of butane or ethanol or whatever it
mm-hmm.
may be. And that's just not something I want to consume.
Yep. I highlighted this last part here as just me being such a diehard lover of hydrocarbon stuff. And I personally don't think solventless extracts are healthier or have less health risk, because when you look at, sure, okay, one point against solvent for the potential residuals in there, but I would push back by saying a puff, like lighting a cigarette or lighting a joint with a light Bic lighter, gives you like 400 ppms of butane that you're inhaling right there, which is much more than you're going to get in a couple dabs. But with solventless, you have the risk of mold, which is arguably just as bad or worse than the potential of residual solvents. Um, but you also have the added waxes and lipids because you're not removing those. Um, and what do those break down into under high temperature or pyrolysis conditions? I don't know, but I can't imagine it's great. And so that's just one where I'm like, I don't know if one's safer or better than the other. It's like
I
no one's
will
died from either.
I will say I actually kind of have an uncommon opinion about this
Let's
because
hear it.
here in the state of Michigan, solventless extracts are not subject to solvent testing at all.
Really?
Yep. So you'll notice on a lot of COAs for bulk rosin and whatnot.
That's crazy. They could have IPA in it or
Yeah,
something like isopropanol.
could be in the jars or anything, and they're just not subjected to that criticism. To where
Hmm.
I agree with you. I don't really think it is a much safer product as much as it is just lobbied as a safer product by other people and claiming that, oh, solvents were made to use this, so there's a health risk, da 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 da. When in reality, hexane is used to make Lay's chips, but
Yeah, that's true.
that's not a
Well,
consumable solvent by any means.
right. And the other thing too is butane boils at like 30 degrees Fahrenheit, 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So unless your fucking extract is actively bubbling in front of you, like it's probably good to hit. Um, I don't know. I've open blasted enough times where it's like the amount of ppms of butane that I've inhaled, and sure, it wasn't great, but it was many orders of magnitude higher than you'll ever get in a gram of extract, and I'm still kicking it somehow.
I'll say
But
I often think that there's probably a lot more residual solvent in the air after jobs when we're cleaning or resetting a room, or even on construction sites that I've been on when I was in
mm-hmm.
high school installing granite tables into houses. There was a lot of acetone flying everywhere.
Dude, yeah, I think back to like high school summer jobs that I did on construction sites like that. That was just God, yeah.
Yeah.
Or even like the early hydrocarbon days when I was first running extraction labs and they were right next to a fucking water heater and water softener. Yeah,
Oh,
like
I've heard
it
stories of
was
people.
horrible.
Yeah, I've heard of people blowing holes in their roof like that before.
Yeah, I mean, I got lucky. Like nothing bad happened there, but yeah, it was a fucking mess. I'm so glad we have C1D ones. Like I'm hoping, because I'm moving back down to the Ann Arbor area, I'm hoping to be able to find a lab job down there, but there's just fucking nothing. So I don't know. We'll see. But I'm just so glad to see at least how the extraction side's evolved, at least to implement the safety measures that we do nowadays. So like I know last episode we covered solventless extraction. Today we touched on hydrocarbon extraction. I know when we talked yesterday, you wanted to touch on another type of extraction. Do you want to dive into that? That's been
Yeah.
kind of piquing your interest lately?
It definitely has been, as Michigan's rules and regulations have been changing. They've been changing in a lot of areas, particularly around other psychoactive compounds coming from plants like peyote, mescaline, dimethyltryptamine, psilocybin, and particularly in the area you just brought up, Ann Arbor. There's been a lot of cool shops and sciences popping up everywhere.
Yeah, dude. I love going to Ann Arbor. Partially for that reason. It's really cool to explore the psychedelic scene that's starting to form down there. And it reminds me so much of Michigan's cannabis industry when I first got into it in 2015, 2016. Granted, not nearly as big. Like there's only a handful of places that you can go to access these substances, but it's really cool to see cities open up their laws and give the citizens the ability to have access to these potentially healing plants or these entheogens. But we've got Ann Arbor, Ferndale, Jackson. Isn't there one more? Or am I
So I know that there is Detroit. I'm not sure if it's including. Yeah, no, I don't believe it includes Wayne County as a whole, but
okay?
I know it's Detroit, Ferndale, Hazel Park,
Okay,
actually all of Washtenaw County and
nice.
Jackson County as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, I can't wait to get back down to that area because psychedelic is something that's really interested me. And like as a chemist, one of my like heroes is Sasha Shulgin. And for those of you that don't know, he's credited with making MDMA, 2CB, and about 1,000 other research chemicals that him and his wife would try out. And his wife was a basically psychologist who would utilize these substances for psychotherapy. And I think there's so much benefit when it comes to like depression, PTSD, for psilocybin use, DMT use. I've seen a couple places that offer peyote. So I'm really excited to kind of dive into that more. When it comes to psychedelics, what is kind of your main interest or what have you been diving into lately?
So lately, I've been diving into the interest of extracting, the phenylamines from the plants. At the end of the day, I'm not really trying to get all Breaking Bad with it or anything, but it's interesting to see how a lot of these compounds are almost just hidden in plain sight from us and
Hmm.
how naturally occurring they can be. I'm sure you've heard before that DMT is kind of everywhere in minute
Yeah.
amounts. And
Yeah. I mean, our lungs make it. You and I are guilty of having a Schedule One substance in us right now.
yeah, it's just not in active high amounts to where you're really tripping off of it.
Right.
And it I'll say like a little interest spiked through its use, but it's also kind of how I saw the cannabis industry evolving in its early days, where okay, this is kind of the opportunity to get on the ground floor of something and try to figure out some new science, try to actually help people in the future and make it easier for the next generation potentially. Because if we can use a lot of these compounds as medicine and actually get developed methods and therapies going on with them, then I think that there could be great potential for these.
And I think we are going kind of that route because unlike what we saw with cannabis, and actually it is kind of mirroring cannabis, because when I go to these places, there's two that I kind of mainly like to check out whenever I'm in the area. The products that they are um, having on display, they're not like branded. There's no companies behind it. There's a couple, like one or two that are like kind of commercializing it, but you're not really seeing it becoming productized. And that was kind of like cannabis in the early caregiver days. Like the caregivers weren't trying to make a personal brand out of themselves. Maybe one or two did. And like eventually you started seeing businesses and companies basically being formed out of these caregiver models. But I don't know if psychedelics is going to evolve that way. Um, what are your thoughts? Like, if psychedelics were legal today, we know like the government, Trump, because of Joe Rogan, is interested in kind of exploring changing these laws. Do you see psychedelics evolving like cannabis, or is that market going to go like pharma? what's your thoughts on how that evolves?
First impression I'll say of it is that it's going to go to big pharma just because of a lot of the potential adverse side effects some people could have, and great intense feelings it can give people. It's something that needs to be played around with very carefully, and I almost call this speculation or half-assed conspiracy. I almost kind of see it as companies like Big Pharma are struggling right now to try to figure out how they could be able to monetize compounds like THC or cannabis products. And I could see them maybe starting to want to get ahead with these future compounds getting decriminalized or legalized.
I've got a little opposite view here, and honestly, I don't know enough about how big pharma operates to say that I'm any bit qualified to talk on this subject,
Yeah.
but I just know the research that's been out because I read a lot of research. I know I sent you like a folder that just had cannabis and DMT files that was peer reviewed research that I read, and that's only like a fifth of my like research library, and there was a couple hundred files in there, and a lot of those did come from pharmaceutical nature, we'll call it, like they were either looking for a good example is MDMA was originally trialed as a like blood pressure medication, a heart medication. Um, LSD was a molecule made by Sandoz, which was a pharmaceutical company, and then shelved. So these pharma companies have fucked with these compounds for so long and they haven't really utilized them. I don't think they're going to dick around with them going forward. And if they do, it would probably be like non psychoactive derivatives. So,
I do see what you mean there, because even bringing up Alexander Sasha Shulkin, he initially worked
mhm,
for Dow Chemicals, and
exactly.
after he invented that biodegradable pesticide for him, they really let him do whatever. And
Yeah,
if you ask me, they kind of let mescaline sit on the shelf for quite a
exactly.
while.
And so I also think when you look at like peptides, GLP drugs, different like weight loss medications, they have so many different avenues that they can explore. I don't necessarily think that they're interested in messing around with mental health, especially with drugs and which could be we'll just say lawsuit prone if it goes bad and whatnot, or it's hard to control and predict um, the outcomes. So it's like these companies have so much money on the line and it costs so much money to bring a drug to market. I think that if they wanted to, they already would have. And we kind of see it with cannabis too. Like there's only a handful of medications that are FDA approved using cannabis, and that's like Epidiolex, Sativex, Marinol, um, Dronabinol. They didn't really like get commercialized. Really, they never really popped off compared to if you look at like big pharma's most profitable drug in history. I'm curious. I'm going to go to Claude and see what it is. But if I were to guess right now, it's probably like fucking Prozac or Lipitor.
I
Hey,
will
I'm
say
doing a Higher Thoughts podcast. Real quick, what's the most profitable medication for big pharma in all of history? Sorry, I was doing the voice to text there.
I will say I I do find it interesting because, like, when you look back in the era of from 2008 to 2015 ish, there really wasn't much science being able to be done on even cannabis because of the federal. Oh, you were right 100% on the dot. That is hilarious. But like I was saying, there wasn't much ground for the science, and I think that that's what's starting to build now. Even with where we're at in the cannabis industry, well, other companies didn't have the room or the means legally to start manufacturing some of these and being able to actually market them as sociably acceptable now. I
That's
think
true.
that's part of what our industry is, uh, kind of being made to do as we figure out more what we're going to do with the legality of cannabis moving forward. Because I know right now everybody's scared with the rescheduling of cannabis, wondering if it's going to go to medical companies or if the Fed is going to come in, start cracking down on dispensaries, and disrupt
True.
the state's legalization so far. So I do think that the opportunity with psychedelics is there, but even with like big pharma getting introduced, like I said, I honestly think myself that that's more or less a conspiracy thought and something that probably wouldn't even come to fruition for like another 20 years.
Right. Well, here's a good example for you is how many big pharma companies are involved in ketamine, and ketamine being psychedelic, being Schedule 3. Sure, there are ketamine clinics that pop up, and there is like I get ads every once in a while on Facebook for S-ketamine, those tropes or however you pronounce it. So it's like there are some, but my big thing is I don't know outside of like a doctor prescribing it or a psychologist prescribing it for some sort of like psychedelic assisted sessions and therapy. I don't know how you productize it because the average person isn't hitting a DMT pen like they are a nicotine vape or a Puffco. Um, Outside of microdosing, which even then you really only do in a 1 or 2 month stint or sprint at most, the average person's not doing like a trip or a macro dose of mushrooms every weekend. It's something that like sure people can abuse it, and I know of like a couple people, but it's far and few between. Like these substances, once you really kind of dive into them, you get a healthy respect for them, and you learn that it's not like an everyday occasion. So it's like, I don't know how many repeat purchases you're going to get. You might have someone that buys 1 or 2 vape pens in a couple year stint. Like, I'm trying to think, my pen, someone I know's DMT pen was purchased around 420 last year, and it's only like a quarter of the way gone.
Yeah,
So
it's
I
not necessarily a frequent use product, and anyone who would be using it very frequently, I'd probably recommend not to.
so here's something. Do you think that the producers of these DMT cartridges, granted, again, this is in a completely legal area for YouTube and the viewers of that. So, do you think that they'll start using smaller vape cartridges now that, or like just assuming that people aren't going to be utilizing it too much, so they don't want it to go bad? Because like this person that I know's vape cart is a 1 milliliter vape cart. There's no fucking need for that. Like that person would have been totally fine buying a zero point 0.1 or zero point 0.2 mil vape, knowing that that's all they need. And whenever they want to re up, they'll just fucking re up.
Yeah, I will definitely say it's a common sight in stores that I've seen around in the areas nearby where people are mostly using smaller cells
Okay.
for their vapes because one, it's a very powerful compound to be messing with, and two, like you mentioned, it's not something you really want to use all the time, all day, every day. It's just not. You really could end up leading into some serious issues with that if you don't know what you're messing with, or maybe
Yep.
you're just not prepared in the right mind state for it. But
Hmm.
ultimately, It's something I've definitely seen, and even in my own little practice and fiddling with it, I personally don't want that much.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's it's something you got to respect, and I think it'll kind of teach it to you if you don't. But I'm curious. The inner chemist in me wants to know, like, how difficult is DMT to actually extract? Like, and what are you using as your start base?
So that's the beautiful thing about some of these compounds that got decriminalized in the area. Because after they got decriminalized, I decided to take a little look at that myself, and you know, realize that it's not all too difficult. Realistically, it's just like extracting cannabis from a weed plant. You got to extract your target compound from the biomass material that you have. In a lot of instances for dimethyltryptamine, people use acacia wood or they will use Mimosa hostilis root bark. That's,
That's the one I've always heard.
oh yeah, it's very prevalent throughout the threads on the internet. And even in some books that I have, I actually have one sitting on my shelf. It's a little too far out of reach, but I just bought it
Nice.
off of Amazon because I respected the love of sharing the information. I think it's a little basic in procedure, but I also don't think everybody needs to be producing mass quantities at home.
That's true. So, you said it's kind of like cannabis. Are you doing like a high pressure solvent like butane, or is it? I've seen people on Reddit talk about acid base extractions and then they precipitate out with a salt. Like, what's it all entail if you can go into it? If not, it's all I understand. But
No,
uh,
by all means, I'm more than happy to share the information because, like I said, it's already out there, and I'm just going to regurgitate what was regurgitated to me. Um, Ultimately, you really want to start with cooking your root bark, getting it into water. And when I say cooking, really you don't have to, but it's nice to apply some heat to allow your compounds to free out of your bark a little more easily and quicker. Maybe even throw some citric acid in there to try and help free everything up, and also be able to change uh, the polarity of the compound that you're working with, because DMT,
polarity or pH?
yeah,
Because wouldn't the I was gonna say the citric acid is that kind of like the acid in the acid base reaction?
yep, it's gonna make your DMT more water soluble at that point,
Gotcha.
and then after so, once you've saturated your bark for a good minute, given it a couple of stirs at least, then you collect your water off of the solution. A lot of people tend to leave their bark inside the water. Some people that I know filter it off, but from there you then take your water solution and you add a very strong base to it. From what I've read, usually you want to get your pH levels over, I believe, 10. And
So what are you using as a base to do that?
um, a lot of the times people use lye. I don't recommend just buying
Right.
any lye from Walmart or Home Depot. You know, uh, please don't, people. But make sure if you do, you know what you're using and it's 100% lab grade, because
Hmm.
you never know what kind of contaminants you could get from something like
Right.
that. And then after you add your lye, you let your solution. When you add it in, you definitely want to mix it around because it's a strong base. It'll heat up your water pretty quick.
Yep.
But after that's all said and done, what a lot of people do is they will take a non-polar solvent and put that in with their water and mix it around. Either shake their jar of the two combined liquids, or put a paddle bit in it and let it spin. But because um, you added the base into the solution, it'll help free up the DMT a little bit into a nonpolar crystallized state. A lot of the times I'll even see it just float to the top of the solution,
Okay.
especially if you add salt into it, which helps free out anything from the water as well and push all of the nonpolar compounds up into the hexane.
Hmm.
But after you have your hexane saturated with the target compound that you're trying to collect, you end up pouring that off, maybe just setting it out for a bit, letting it evaporate. And then once it evaporates, you'll notice a little thin sheet of white crystalline product, sometimes maybe even yellow or brown, depending on the temperatures you extract at. But from there, even though it is evaporated, just like with hydrocarbon processing, I would recommend going further. Try adding a little bit of heat, a fan or vacuum, whatever you can. Get all that off there. There's a lot of different nonpolar solvents I've seen floating around in the forums, like naphtha. I've even heard of people using hexane, which, if you don't know,
Hexane is good.
oh, it's a great solvent, but it does have an affinity for sticking to fats and whatnot.
Hmm.
So definitely send your product to third-party labs for testing and make sure you're not getting those residuals stuck, as hexane's not even good to eat, you know?
Right. So for cannabis, we're getting like, I don't know, 10 to 18 or 20% would be a good yield. What's the yields looking like on DMT?
Well, it definitely does vary based on a few conditions, such as your extraction methods and your starting material. I've heard of yields up into 3%,
Okay.
especially from people using acacia wood,
So that's
but
like rosin yields.
kind of. I will say yields into that level are heavy in fats, heavy in saps, and other
Gotcha.
unidentified products coming from the plant. Um, but when it comes to just pure DMT that is stored in the plant, in my experience, the most average yield that I've seen is anywhere from 1 to 2%.
Okay. So not yielding much. I'm curious, when you said the waxes and just other shits kind of coming out with it, do you ever use like a small chromatography column, like one of those glass 2 inch by 24 inches, just to clean up the crystals and then do like just a quick recrystallization?
So we do quite a bit of recrystallization, actually, especially on our first pulls that come off of the jars, because those are usually
Hmm.
our more fat and uh, our fat and color pigment heavy pulls.
Gotcha.
But
No, did I lose you? My internet sucks. Well, I just shot him a text. We'll see if we get Matt back. This happened last time. I think it's my internet. Living up here in Sault Ste. Marie, the internet fucking sucks, and we only have one provider to pick from. So I am so excited to get downstate. I'm actually going to be in a couple days driving down there with my better half, and we are going to be touring just a bunch of apartments in the Ann Arbor, Belleville area. And I'm just so excited to be back in civilization and infrastructure, back around friends and family, and hopefully around a job market that's conducive to finding a job, because that's been an issue up here. There's not any cannabis companies around, and a handful of companies up here are just really not good people to work for. So his computer died on him.
yeah, my apologies about that. But I'll say to finish up what I was saying about the recrystallization and rewashing, we've definitely had to experiment with that and doing different temperatures and pulls. And when you're trying to extract everything you can out of a material, you're always going to end up with some unwanted stuff. So it's become a pretty crucial step in trying to figure out what's inside of what and how to get it out.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a spot where a chromatography column from like USA Labs or Best Value Vax would I mean they're like $200. You get a little lab stand, and then you just pour your silica in it. It's got a little valve at the bottom. And you'll have to figure out at what point your DMT is eluting from the column. So that might just be referencing peer-reviewed research or trial and error. But and that would just be like catching your different fractions and then recrystallizing out those fractions and seeing if it's a lipid or the crystal that you're looking for. But yeah, is there anything else that you really wanted to dive into? If not, I say we wrap it up. It's been about an hour and a half. Got into a lot of good science there.
Yeah, it's been really fun. And, I really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me, man. I always enjoy our conversations.
Likewise, and anytime, man. That's what this podcast is here for. So I'm glad to be able to finally jump back on it. I know we've been talking about it for a while, so I'm stoked. And I think when you had messaged originally saying like, "Hey, I think we can do better," I think we definitely did a little bit better on this one. So I'm stoked to get editing it tomorrow and to have it launched and live.
Sweet. I'm excited to see it as well, and I hope everyone likes it.
All right, man. Have a good one. And if y'all like this, I would really appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube bullshit. Have a good one.